Hello everybody, we're going to get started on talking about means of egress. This is the most important chapter in your textbook and in the IBC. You will realize, of course, that it's a very lengthy chapter. In addition to, you will need to spend many hours reviewing and looking at all of the content within this particular textbook and in the IBC chapter 10. The first step, give you a little scenario. You've had 3 weeks of intense looking at codes, but you need to read chapter 4 in your textbook, Means of Egress, because we know it's the most commonly described as a continuous and unobstructed path of travel from any point in the building to its exterior or public way. That's what means of egress is defined as. It's comprised of both vertical and horizontal passageways, including such components as doorways, corridors, stairs, ramps, enclosures, and intervening rooms. We've had some of these discussions earlier in some of the scenarios that I've given you. To kind of reflect a little bit, what you need to do is you need to read chapter 4 in your textbook. Read it all the way from beginning to end. Then read it again, highlighting and marking some of the things that you will see that you feel that's important. Now, let's open the IBC chapter 10. And this is where you need to really look and make sure that you have an understanding, because there's so many tables, so many words that you're going to end up needing to be able to create or understand or be able to do some of the scenarios within the book. So the first thing is, I always say, to kind of go through this particular one. If you look at section 103, it kind of tells you certain scenarios that you need to know. It talks about ceiling heights. You can see here where it says ceiling heights, means of egress. I have a ceiling height of not less than 7 foot 6 inches. So it's going to talk to you and tell you the exact heights that you can have in particular rooms. It's going to go through and tell you what you can and cannot do. It's going to talk about protruding objects. It's going to talk about headrooms permitted. So like if you have signage, then of course a minimum headroom of 80 inches shall be provided for any walking services. It's not more than 50% of the ceiling area of a means of egress shall be reduced in height by protruding objects. So it's going to go through and tell you all of these things, design dilemmas that you may end up having. So you need to be able to look at this. It's also going to point out like elevators and escalators and moving walks. They shall not be used as a component of a required means of egress from any part of the building. A lot of times you might go to a hotel and you see the sign right next to the elevator. You may not use in case of a fire. It also goes through and talks about occupant load. We used all of this in chapter 3 of your textbook because we reviewed and got to know a little bit of the table, the maximum floor area allowances per occupancy. We learned, of course, of the function of the table, the occupant load. We learned how we could increase, which we're going to end up using a little bit more. It talks about fixed seating. Okay, if you have fixed seating, how you count the chairs in through there. We really used a lot of these, so you need to go through. And it also talked about fixed seating if you have bench or without dividing arms every 18 inches. And we learned that, of course, from the pews or the scenarios we did of the church. Then the next thing you're going to look at is section 1005, which gets into a little bit of means of egress sizing. We're going to learn a little bit about stairways, and you need to highlight this one right here. You see my little star and how I have it highlighted? You're going to need to know what this means here because we're going to use that in certain scenarios coming up. And then in 105.3.2, it has other egress components. So we have stairways here, but other ingress components would be doorways. So you need to highlight this 105.3.2 and understand that and understand the exceptions that you can see here. And also, we're going to learn about 105.5, distribution of egress capacity, where more than one exit or access to more than one exit is required. That means shall be configured so that the loss of any one exit or access to one exit shall not be reduced the availability to less than 50% of the required capacity. This is kind of when you go back and you read the chapter, you're going to hear about the diagonal approach. This is what it's referring to. It's also going to talk about doors. Doors, when fully open, should not reduce the required width of more than 7 inches. What it's talking about is your corridor. So if your hallway is opening, the door cannot intrude into that pathway, means of egress, more than 7 inches. You'll notice in our design building and a lot of different buildings, you see that the doorways are recessed within the classroom. That's what it's talking about. It tells you, of course, mounting, the hardware, all of the different items that go here. We'll also know means of egress, of course, illumination, which we will get in later on, so you could kind of skip that one. But accessibility means of egress, because it's going to tell you what you can be approved for accessibility means of egress on that particular chapter. Talked about elevators, and it's going to talk about stairways. This is a very important chapter here. You'll notice that I have it underlined, so you need to make sure you mark 107.3 stairways. And it's going to give you exceptions. The clear width of 48 inches between handrails is not required in buildings equipped with an automatic sprinkler system. It's telling you how big it is and what the exceptions are. One of the things that you need to understand and know is areas of refuge. Every required area of refuge has to be for someone who has accessible from the space it serves as an accessible means of egress. An area of refuge is if somebody's in a wheelchair or cannot go up and down stairways, they have to have a safe place to be able to go and make sure that they have time to get out of the building where somebody can come and get them at a later time. So this particular area, you can see how I have it highlighted and marked. All of this you need to make sure that you have put in place. We're going to learn later on about communication, two-way communication, and level of exit discharge. So this whole chapter here is very important. Okay, in addition, if you keep turning, we're going to end up looking at section 108. This is doors, gates, and turnstiles. So you need to look. You can see how I have 108.1 marked, 108.1.1 size of doors, okay, which we kind of pretty well know once we've gotten in this particular class, but we need to make sure, and projections into clear width. We don't really design a lot of revolving doors, but you need to be able to know, of course, the speed, the power, and the manual part of those doors. Another important one is 108.1.6, landings at doors. So you need to kind of look over that. And thresholds. You will learn a little bit more about thresholds when we get into, or you get into the class 312, but there's a section of that, so you need to be aware of those. Door operations, the hardware height. It tells you exactly what you can and cannot do. Then we're going to skip on over to stairways. Stairways are really important, and that is section 1009. And through here, you're going to learn a little bit about widths of stairways and what you can use on that, the construction of the materials, what fire-resistant ratings that have to be in there. But one of the things that's really important is 109.4, the width of stairways. This is real important, this whole section here, and the headroom that's there. So you need to go through and highlight those. If you haven't, then you need to try to do that. It talks also about riser heights, thread depths. Those are things that are real important that you will need to know. And then we get into section 109.8, stairway landings. And that's another one that's important. Okay, you're going to learn about ramps, and you'll end up seeing about ramps, but we're going to go ahead and handrails. You'll see section 1012, that's important. Exit access, which is section 1014. Exit access, to learn what that is. But the next thing that you need to kind of look at is, or understand, is your common path of egress travel, which is 1014.3. This is one table we will use. And then table 1015.1, spaces with one exit or exit access. This is for 3 or more exit or exit-way doorways. You need to know that, because this is a formula right in through here that we're going to be using. So you need to make sure that you have this highlighted on page 262 of your IBC code book. Another table or section that you need to look at is section 1016. This is exit access travel distance. How far can you go in a building before you have to get to an exit? This, of course, is with and without a sprinkler system. So note table 1016.2. Very important that you get those down. Okay, in addition to, as I said, we're going to really spend some time in exit access section 1014, exit and exit access doorways 1015, and then we're going to get into corridors 1018, section 1018 corridors. This is on page 264, and you need to be able to know what a corridor. Corridor is just like a hallway that you go within a building. And they have different fire resistant ratings depending, of course, of what is the occupancy. So if you look at table 1018.1, it's going to tell you what that rating has to be and whether you have a sprinkler system or without a sprinkler system. It's also in this section going to talk about minimum corridor widths. That's table 1018.2. You need to make sure you know that, because it's going to talk about corridor widths. There is also a term we're going to talk about, dead ends, when there's more than one exit or exit doorway, the length of that. That means you go down a hallway and it doesn't go to the outside. Most of the time your corridor widths have to be 20 feet, and that's it, to be dead end. But there are exceptions to that. You'll notice which groups give you 50 feet. So you need to be aware of those exceptions that are there. Number of exits and exits configuration. Table, of course, 1021. This is a very important one, from exits from different stories, or exits that are where there's more. This is kind of like the formula that we will be working with. So you need to highlight the section 1021 and look at those. Also, there's a table, 2 tables that you might want to reference. Table 1021.2 and table 1021.2. So you can look at those and be able to see those. So you can see there's quite a few tables that you need to look at. One, of course, I will point out on page 268 when we talk about construction and closures of interior exits, stairways, and ramps constructed as fire barriers, horizontal assemblies, interior exit stairways, and ramp enclosures shall have a fire resistant rating of not less than 2 hours when connecting 4 stories or more, and not less than 1 hour where connecting less than 4 stories. So that's an important one to be able to look at and understand. So that's table, not table, but that is indicator 1022.2. We're going to talk about horizontal exits, which is 1025. So you might want to make sure that you understand about that particular chapter. So look over that. There's then a whole section of 1028 where it talks about assemblies. So you need to be able to look at those. And then there's a section where we get into aisle access width for seating, which is 1028.10.1.1. This is real important. You're going to see that in your textbook, but this is where you find the seating at tables and the seating of aisle access. Those are really important ones to be able to look at. So that's going to kind of cover a little bit of what you're going to be going over, and all the different ones for the emergency escapes and rescue sections. That is important that you can see within here, emergency escape and rescue. So if you will, take the time, of course, to go through and look at all of the different indicators that you find within your IBC code book. It's very important that you get familiar with those. And so hopefully you will watch over those, read those, get to know it, read the chapter in the textbook, and then we can go through and dive in. So watch this video first, go through and read it, highlight it. I know it's a lot of information, but it's information that you're going to get to know.